In the year 1847, on a night when the frost pressed its white breath against the windows of Wetherby Hall, the Duke sat in the great dining room beneath a chandelier that flickered with the restless light of 50 candles. The scent of charred meat hung faintly in the air, a silent omen of the embarrassment yet to unfold. The Duke of Wetherby, newly widowed and notorious for his temper, had spent weeks preparing for this supper, a gathering meant to reassert his place among England's most watchful peers. Yet, as the silver covers were lifted and the room filled with the hum of polite expectation, the first course arrived curdled and pale, the sauce split like old varnish upon porcelain. At the head of the table, the Duke's jaw stiffened. His reputation for discipline was almost as renowned as his fortune. No servant dared speak above a whisper in his presence. The Earl of Pembroke, his guest of honor, glanced down at the dish with the faintest twitch of amusement. His wife, the Countess, whose beauty was matched only by her appetite for cruelty, leaned to her companion and murmured just loud enough for the room to hear, "It seems the Duke's hearth has grown as cold as his heart." A thin laugh rippled through the table, quickly stifled but deadly all the same. Behind the carved oak doors, the kitchen was chaos. Clara Hartwell, the Duke's cook, stood over the ruined dish with trembling hands. She was not young, nor pretty in the fashionable sense. Her plain face carried the quiet dignity of someone used to being unseen. The kitchen maids looked to her in panic, but she said nothing, only drew a deep, shaking breath and whispered, "It will have to serve." The words felt like surrender. Moments later, the Duke entered. His presence filled the room before his voice did. The servants froze, spoons midair, flames quivering under the pans. "This," he said softly, lifting a ladle of the congealed sauce, "is what you set before my guests." His tone was almost calm, which was worse than anger. Clara stood still, her hands clasped tightly in her apron, eyes lowered. I misjudged the timing, Your Grace," she stammered. "Misjudged?" He let the word hang, sharp as broken glass. "The Earl's carriage traveled 40 miles and reigned to dine here. And you misjudged?" Her throat worked as though she might speak, but no sound came. The Duke's eyes, gray as sleet, narrowed, not with cruelty, but with the weight of his own humiliation. He turned abruptly toward the doorway where the butler lingered, hoping to vanish into the shadows. "Tell Mrs. Hartwell she may leave at once," he said coldly. "I'll hire a better cook than you." A silence fell so complete, it seemed even the fire dared not crackle. Then Clara, her face pale as flour, gave a tiny nod and moved to pass him. As she did, the cuff of her sleeve slipped back. What the Duke saw then stilled him. Dark bruises encircling her wrist like the marks of iron shackles. Not fresh, but not old either. He spoke before he thought. "Who did that to you?" She froze, her breath caught. "No one, Your Grace. I am clumsy." He frowned. "That is not clumsiness." But she would not meet his gaze. "Please, sir, I'll gather my things." And with that, she disappeared through the side door into the corridor beyond, leaving only the echo of her soft steps and the smell of smoke. The Duke remained there for a long moment, the taste of his own words bitter in his mouth. Around him, the servants shifted uncertainly. He dismissed them all and returned to the dining hall. The guests, sensing the chill in the air, filled the silence with brittle conversation. The Countess raised her glass, her eyes gleaming. "A pity," she said sweetly, "that your household lacks the feminine touch it once had." The Duke did not answer. He took his seat again and endured the remainder of the evening in silence. Each polite word from his guests another needle in the fabric of his composure. When at last the candles guttered low and the carriages departed into the mist, he climbed the grand staircase alone. The portraits of his ancestors watched from the walls. Men and women of flawless posture and cold authority, each seeming to judge his failure. In his study, he poured a glass of brandy and stared into the fire until the flames blurred. He thought of Clara's hands, red from work, roughened by years of labor, and of those bruises. They were not the marks of a careless fall. They spoke of restraint, of cruelty inflicted with purpose. The realization unsettled him more than any insult from the Earl. By midnight, the house was quiet save for the wind against the windows. The Duke rose, unable to rest. He walked to the servants' quarters, a place he had never entered without necessity. The narrow corridor smelled faintly of soap and damp linen. He found the door to the cook's chamber ajar. Inside, the small bed was neatly made. The trunk at its foot stood open but empty. On the dresser, a single kerchief lay folded beside a half-burned candle. She had gone, vanished into the night, leaving nothing of herself but a faint impression of presence. For a long while he stood there, hands clasped behind his back. In his chest, a strange unease stirred, something that felt like remorse but carried the sharper edge of curiosity. Who was she, truly, this quiet woman who never met as I yet bore her pain without complaint? He extinguished the candle and turned away, the question following him like a ghost up the stair. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and relentless, covering the gravel drive and the footprints of the cook who had fled. In the empty corridors of Wetherby Hall, the Duke of Wetherby paused at his chamber door, hearing again his own voice in the silence. "I'll hire a better cook than you," and wondered, for the first time in years, whether he had spoken like a man at all. The following morning, the Duke of Wetherby awoke before dawn, his sleep broken by the memory of those bruises. The fire in his chamber had burned low, its embers glowing like the faint heart of an unsolved question. He told himself it was a matter of discipline, of responsibility for those under his command. Yet when he summoned his butler, the words that came out betrayed a different urgency. "Has Mrs. Hartwell returned?" The butler hesitated, eyes lowered. "No, Your Grace. Her belongings are gone." One of the maids said she left before sunrise, carrying only a small parcel. The Duke's expression hardened, but within, something faltered, an unease that no title could steady. By breakfast, the house was already alive with whispers. Servants have a gift for building stories out of silence, and the tale of the vanished cook traveled from the scullery to the stables before the hour struck 9. The Duke could almost feel the speculation breathing through the walls as he passed. At the head of the table, untouched tea cooling beside him, he opened the morning papers but saw nothing of the printed words. His mind replayed the faint tremor of Clara's voice, the way she had flinched as though struck long before he had spoken in anger. That afternoon, his valet, a discreet man named Ellis, brought him a fragment of truth. "If it pleases Your Grace," he began cautiously, "the coachman who drove Mrs. Hartwell last week believes she once worked at Ashcombe Hall." The name stirred a faint recognition. Ashcombe. The Duke looked up. Lord Harwood's estate. Ellis nodded. "Aye, Your Grace." Though she never spoke of it, some of the staff suspected she left in distress. "I thought it best you should know." The Duke dismissed him, but the information refused to settle quietly. Lord Harwood's reputation had long been the subject of genteel silence, the kind of silence that concealed cruelty behind wealth. A thought, unbidden, came to the Duke. What if the bruises had been earned there? What if the woman he had dismissed so curtly had fled something far darker than incompetence? At dusk, the Duke rode out alone. The countryside stretched before him, the fields shrouded in mist, hedgerows glistening with frost. Each hoofbeat echoed like a question he could not answer. His horse carried him along the road toward the nearest parish, where rumor might have found footing. The vicar, a kindly man of simple faith, greeted him with surprise. "Your Grace honors my humble church. How may I serve?" The Duke spoke plainly, though not without hesitation. "I'm seeking a woman. A servant, perhaps recently arrived. Her name is Clara Hartwell." The vicar frowned thoughtfully. "No such name has passed my ear, though a woman came seeking work at the parish school yesterday. She gave her name as Mrs. Hale." The Duke's breath caught. "Describe her." "Plain of dress, quiet, with eyes that looked everywhere but at you," the vicar said. "A gentle soul, I'd say, though one burdened by care." That evening, the Duke found himself outside the small stone schoolhouse on the edge of town. Through the frosted window, he saw her, bent over a table, teaching a child to write. Her sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow, and the bruises were fading now, pale shadows of what they had been. For a long time he stood there in the cold, uncertain whether to disturb the peace she seemed to have built in his absence. But then she looked up, sensing perhaps that she was watched, and her gaze met his through the glass. She did not startle or flee. Instead, she set down her pen and opened the door. "You should not have come," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "I came to see that you were safe." His words sounded strangely foreign to his own ears. "You left without permission, without explanation." She folded her hands before her, the candlelight softening the sharp lines of her face. "I had no right to stay, Your Grace. You dismissed me." He hesitated. "I was wrong. I spoke in anger. But there is something I must know. Those Bruises who—" "Please," she interrupted, her tone trembling between pride and pain. "Do not ask what you already suspect." The wind pressed against the door, whistling through its old hinges. The Duke's eyes searched hers, and what he saw there, resignation, endurance, stirred him more deeply than pity could. "You cannot remain here unprotected," he said quietly. "If those who harmed you learn where you are—" "I have nothing they would come for," she answered. "Only my work, only peace." Her defiance, cloaked in gentleness, unsettled him. He drew a breath, forcing restraint into his voice. "Then accept my assistance. You may return to Wetherby, not as a servant, but under my protection. No one need know your past." A faint, incredulous smile touched her lips. "And what would the world say of a duke who shelters his cook?" "The world," he replied, "has said crueler things with less cause." For a moment, the space between them seemed to breathe. Then she looked away, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the candle to snuff it out. "I cannot, Your Grace. I will not be the cause of your disgrace." He wanted to protest, but something in her tone forbade it. She curtsied with quiet finality and closed the door. Through the thin wood he heard her whisper a prayer, and then nothing. When the Duke returned to Wetherby Hall, the lamps were already dimmed. A letter awaited him on his desk, and signed, its script fine and deliberate. "If you value your name and station, abandon your search. The woman belongs to Ashcombe." He read the words twice, then folded the paper carefully and set it aflame in the hearth. The fire caught quickly, consuming the message until only a trace of smoke remained. He stood there long after the flames had died, the echo of her voice still lingering in the quiet room. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow, and somewhere beyond the fields lay a truth he was no longer willing to ignore. London's air hung heavy with coal smoke and early spring rain when the Duke of Wetherby entered White's Club, that polished sanctuary of privilege where scandal was born in whispers and died in silence. He came not for companionship, but for confrontation. Lord Harwood was already there, lounging before the fire with a glass of claret in hand, his laughter too loud, his confidence the easy armor of a man never held to account. The Duke paused only long enough to remove his gloves, each motion deliberate. "Harwood," he said, his voice steady, formal, edged with frost. Harwood turned, surprise flickering across his ruddy face before pleasure replaced it. "Wetherby, the widowed Duke graces us at last. I was beginning to think grief had turned you into a recluse." "I come on business, not pleasure," the Duke replied. "It concerns a former servant of yours, a woman by the name of Clara Hartwell." The room fell quieter. Men pretended not to listen. Harwood's smile tightened, his eyes sharpening like a blade. "Ah, the cook," he said slowly, savoring the word. "A troublesome creature. Ungrateful, if memory serves." "Ungrateful?" The Duke's tone darkened. "I have reason to believe she fled your household in fear for her safety." Harwood chuckled, a coarse sound that grated against the polished air. "Fear? My dear Duke, servants are like hounds. They whimper when corrected. She fancied herself too fine for obedience. I might have forgiven her insolence had she shown enthusiasm for other forms of service." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You speak carelessly, and you listen too closely," Harwood retorted. "What is she to you? A cook, nothing more. Surely the mighty Duke of Wetherby has better amusements than rescuing fallen maids." Something inside the Duke shifted, a heat that was not rage alone, but a deeper recognition of the rot beneath the civility he had once revered. "You will not speak her name again," he said quietly, each syllable carrying the weight of command. Harwood's smirk faltered under the cold precision of that gaze. Without another word, the Duke turned and left, the hush that followed his departure louder than any applause. That night, Wetherby Hall was still when he returned, yet the storm outside clawed at the windows like an accusation. He found no rest. The image of Harwood's sneer and Clara's bruised wrists interwove until indignation became resolve. Before dawn, he sent a rider to Leeds with instructions. Mrs. Hartwell was to be brought back to the estate. No argument, no refusal. When she arrived 2 days later, pale from travel, the Duke met her at the door himself. She curtsied, eyes lowered. "You should not have troubled yourself, Your Grace. I was safe where I was." "Safe," he echoed, his voice quiet but firm, "while that man lives without consequence." Her gaze flickered to his, wary. "You cannot undo what has been done." "No," he said, "but I can ensure it is not done again." He offered her refuge under a guise of necessity. His household short-staffed, her skill required. But the truth lay deeper. She accepted only when he swore no harm would come to her from any quarter, even his own household's gossip. Within days, the rhythm of the manor changed. Servants moved differently, sensing something unspoken between master and cook. The Duke's temper, once legendary, softened into watchful silence. Clara carried out her duties with precision, her presence a quiet steadiness that unsettled and soothed him in equal measure. One night, a storm broke across the moors, fierce and unrelenting. The house shook with the wind's fury, shutters rattling like bones. Clara lingered in the kitchen long after the others had gone to bed, tending the fire against the drafts. When the Duke entered, his coat damp with rain, she started. "Your Grace, you should not be here." "And yet," he said, removing his gloves, "neither should you." He looked around the dim kitchen, the glow of the hearth, the scent of bread cooling on the table. "Does the storm keep you awake?" "It is easier to face the wind than the dreams it wakes," she murmured. He studied her face, the calm strength that sorrow had carved into grace. "Tell me," he said gently, "what happened at Ashcombe?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a breath that trembled between courage and fatigue, she began. "My parents died when I was 14. I was sent into service at Lord Harwood's estate. At first he was kind, too kind. He praised my diligence, my quietness. Then came the gifts, the touches meant to seem fatherly. When I refused his advances, he turned cruel. The bruises you saw were not the first." Her voice faltered, but she continued. "When I fled, I thought only of survival. I changed my name, my history. I had hoped never to speak of it again." The Duke's hand clenched at his side. "You have endured more than should be asked of anyone." "I endured what many do," she replied softly, "but few men ask to know it." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire snapped. The storm raged beyond the windows, and between them hung a silence that felt fragile, sacred. The Duke stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clara," he said, her name spoken without title for the first time, reverent as a prayer, "you are not alone in this house." Her breath caught, eyes lifting to meet his. There was no pretense, no deference, only truth, raw and uncertain. She reached for the poker, stirred the fire as though to break the spell, and said quietly, "The world would not forgive you such kindness." "The world," he replied, his gaze steady, "has never forgiven me for less." Thunder rolled above them, shaking the rafters. For a moment, it seemed he might take her hand, might cross that invisible chasm between duty and desire. But he did not. Instead, he inclined his head, a soldier retreating from a battle not yet lost. When he left the kitchen, the storm began to ease. In the silence that followed, Clara pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the echo of words she had never dared to hope for. Upstairs, the Duke stood before his window, rain tracing the glass like restless tears, and understood with painful clarity that his defiance had only just begun. The first breath of spring touched Wetherby Hall with the scent of renewal, though within its walls the air still trembled with rumor. Word of the Duke's defiance, his protection of a servant woman once disgraced, had spread from drawing rooms to dining halls with the speed of malice. Invitations once abundant now arrived seldom, and when they did, they carried the brittle politeness of obligation. Yet the Duke seemed untroubled. He spent more time in the gardens than in Parliament, more hours in quiet thought than in company. Beneath the watchful eyes of servants and society alike, Clara Hartwell remained within his household, not in the kitchens but in the small library where she assisted with the estate's accounts. Her presence, though modest, had become the still point of his days. Clara bore the scrutiny with quiet grace. She felt it in every glance, every murmured pause when she entered a room. To some, she was a curiosity, to others, a scandal in plain attire. Yet she never faltered. The Duke had asked nothing of her beyond honesty and diligence, and she gave both without reservation. What unsettled her was not the world's judgment, but the kindness she found in him, the gentleness beneath his command, the way he seemed less a master than a man learning how to live without armor. One morning, a sealed letter arrived bearing the royal crest. The Duke read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, Clara stood in the doorway, her hands folded before her. "Is it bad news?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "It is a reminder," he said at last, "that one may govern estates but not tongues. The Queen's secretary advises that certain associations may damage the dignity of my title." His eyes met hers briefly, then fell to the paper. "They mean you, Clara." Her face remained calm, but her breath caught. "Then I should go," she said simply. "No." The word came with such quiet force that she flinched. He stepped toward her, his voice low. "Do not mistake pride for protection. If you leave, they win twice, first in cruelty, then in cowardice." She studied him, searching for anger and finding none, only the steady ache of conviction. "And what of your name? You're standing? You have given too much already." He shook his head. "A name is only a chain if one chooses to wear it. I'm tired of bowing to men whose honor is measured by what they conceal." In the days that followed, the estate buzzed with preparations for the annual spring gathering, a tradition older than the Duke himself. The countryside's finest would come to dine, to gossip, to measure one another's fortunes. It was an opportunity to reclaim reputation, to prove that Wetherby still commanded respect. Instead, the Duke made a choice that sent his household into quiet panic. He ordered an invitation extended to Clara Hartwell. The evening arrived radiant with candlelight and music. Carriages rolled through the gates, their occupants dressed in silks and velvet. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with mirrors and chandeliers, but beneath the glitter, tension rippled like a concealed current. When Clara entered, every fan stilled, every conversation faltered. She wore a gown of pale blue muslin, simple, elegant, chosen not to impress, but to preserve her dignity. Her eyes met the Duke's across the room. He inclined his head slightly, as though to say, "You are not alone." Lord Harwood was there, of course. Scandal attracted him as flame does a moth. He approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "How charming," he drawled, "to see virtue rewarded in such generous company." His gaze swept over Clara with a sneer. "Tell me, my dear, have you perfected the art of seasoning your master's meals, or merely his reputation?" The insult sliced the air. Before Clara could respond, the Duke stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. "You mistake silence for guilt, Harwood, and mistake yourself for a man of breeding." Harwood laughed. "You'd defend her before all of London? You'd throw away your rank for a kitchen maid." "I would throw away far more," the Duke said evenly, "to live one day unashamed." His voice carried through the hall, firm but unraised. "This woman has endured your cruelty and borne it with grace you could never comprehend. If honor means protecting the strong, it is nothing. But if it means defending the innocent, it is everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Faces turned, some in admiration, others in horror. Harwood's smirk faded beneath the weight of every watching eye. Without another word, he turned on his heel and left. The orchestra, uncertain, faltered before striking up again, softer this time, as though the music itself had chosen a side. Clara stood still, trembling, her eyes shining not with pride but disbelief. "You should not have done that," she whispered when the murmurs resumed. "I should have done it long ago," he answered. Later, when the guests had departed and the candles burned low, they walked together through the gardens. The night was cool, the air rich with the scent of lilac and new grass. The moon cast a silver path across the lake, and for a moment the world felt cleansed of its judgments. "I have brought you nothing but trouble," Clara said quietly. "You have brought me truth," he replied, "and truth is the only inheritance worth keeping." She turned to him, uncertain. "And what now? What will you do when they turn their backs?" He smiled faintly. "Let them. I have lived long enough among statues. I prefer those who breathe." They walked on in silence until they reached the stone terrace. There, beneath the soft glow of lanterns, the Duke took her hand, not in passion, but in reverence, as though sealing a vow unspoken. "Whatever the world may think," he said, "I know this much: compassion is not weakness. It is the first act of courage." Her fingers tightened around his, and for the first time in years, he felt the stillness of peace settle over him. The night stretched vast and gentle around them, the horizon tinged with the faintest light of dawn. Somewhere beyond the fields, gossip would rise again, sharpened and merciless, but for now, Wetherby Hall stood quiet, a fortress not of pride but of redemption. As the first birds sang in the hedgerow, Clara looked toward the east. "The day is coming," she murmured. "Yes," the Duke said softly, his gaze following the light. "And this time, I mean to meet it as a man unafraid."